So we're in chapter 21 in your world history book, and we're going on to the spread of revolutionary nationalism. So what is revolutionary nationalism? Well, the key word is revolutionary. So when you think of a revolution, you can either think of the American Revolution, which was based on righteousness of God, as they were praying on their knees, we know, or you can think of a revolution by man's heart of selfishness and sin. So now we have the spread of the revolutionary nationalism. And in this case, we have to look at the fruit of it and see whether it was a revolutionary spirit of man and violence and such fruits of it. We can look at the fruit, because basically the Bible says to look at the fruit and see if it's of God. Okay? So now we keep our spiritual eyes open. We have France, we have Belgium, we have Central Europe, we have the German states, we have Italy, Prussia, and socialism. So these things are going on the same time as Britain, Great Britain, England was having peace. So the same time the peace of England is reigning and all the missionaries are coming out of England, that we now have all these revolutions going on in Europe. The revolutions in the 1830s in France. Now remember, in 1789 was the end of the French Revolution. But then we have Napoleon. And Napoleon, in all of his Napoleonic wars, finally, he's wanting to take over the world. He is exiled into a prison, a prison island. And so now we have the issue that Europe has of what do we do with France. France had been restored with national sovereignty intact as before Napoleon. So they thought, let's go back the way France was before Napoleon messed things up, okay? So that's what they were thinking. So the Congress allowed France more land than it had before the Revolution of 1789. Okay, we'll give him some more land. Hopefully France will be peaceful. However, France had a long road to stable government. They had a lot of people that had a revolutionary spirit. And the revolutionary spirit was basically to do with their selves and what was going on. But anyway, the saying was, the more we change, the more we stay the same. And that was true for France. Picture French Revolution, and then after the French Revolution, what do we do with France? Louis the 18th. Okay, we had Louis the 14th. Remember, he was the great monarch, and then we went on to Louis the 16th. What happened to Louis the 16th? Louis the 16th of France was guillotined along with his wife Marie Antoinette during the French Revolution, and they guillotined a lot of people. Let's just say that. It was actually a reign of terror. So now, going back, they thought we should put Louis, his brother, Louis the 18th on the throne and try to get things back to where they were before. So Louis the 18th, and he reigned for 10 years, 1814 to 1824. Here's a picture of him. You see, kind of looks like a little bit on the weak side, doesn't he? So he tried to be a strong monarch, but really he pleased no one. So, in fact, the staunch monarchists thought his policies were too weak. In fact, you need to have stronger policies. While those that advocated democracy thought his policies were too autocratic, too strong. So he had to be somewhere in the middle of that, which would be hard to be the way France was at this time. So they also had a tradition of a multi-party system. What's that? They had many parties, like in England, instead of two parties like England, France had many parties. Many parties wanted to run for president. We usually have 2 or 3 parties running for our president in the United States, while France just had a ton. So this system contributed to a rather unstable government. So because you have so many parties, which party are you going to listen to when you have 20 parties, right? So that was France. So another brother after Louis after Louis the 18th ruled, that should be 18th, he has 16th, but after Louis the 18th, another brother of Louis the 16th ruled. And so his name was Charles the 10th. And he ruled 1824 to 1830 for those 6 years. And so he was another pretty weak ruler. We have one picture of him right here, how he looked back then. So on July 1830, legislature of France refused to support the king. They said, we do not want this king. That's what the legislature, their Congress was saying. So Charles X said, well, I'm just getting rid of the legislature and I'm just going to rule without a parliament, without a legislator. So the citizens revolted against this, thinking they're going to go back to the time of a despot or a tyrant ruler, right? So they're thinking, we can't let him do this. And so barricades went up in the streets, and then again, blood started to flow again. The barricades went up, and then the killing started going rampant. The July Revolution caused Charles X, and he would flee to England. You find a lot of these French kings fleeing to England. So he left for England. And then France's new king was put on the throne, Louis Philippe, and he ruled 1830 to 1848. And here's a picture of him. So you see the difference maybe in the two rulers, maybe no difference at all. So now we have Louis Philippe ruling, which to them was a better ruler than Charles X. So now we're going to get to Belgium. So that was France. We're going to kind of skip around here going over these revolutions because there's many of them. But we're just going to hit some of the high points. So Belgium, we have King Leopold I. In 1815, the Congress of Vienna had joined Belgium and the Dutch Netherlands to create a buffer state against France. So here we go, the Congress again. The Congress of Vienna, they said, okay, we need to have a buffer. We're just going to put the Dutch and Belgium together. They're kind of next to each other anyway. And so they can just have this buffer state so that France won't take over them and they can protect each other. However, the Belgians disliked the Dutch king and they didn't want to be united with the Dutch. And they resented the Dutch language. The Dutch said they had to speak Dutch and Belgians did not want to speak Dutch. So they had problems although Congress thought it a good idea, they did not think it was a good idea. So Belgium declared their independence in 1830 and appointed Leopold I, the uncle of Queen Victoria of England, as their king. And he ruled from 1865 to 1909. That's quite a long rule for the Belgian king. So now Belgium was independent. There was no bloodshed in this. So they just declared, and then he was one that colonized the Congo and Africa too, which just is a side point. Here's a picture of him right here. So King Leopold. So now Belgium was its own country and the Netherlands had their own country. They were satisfied. So in Central Europe, what happens in Central Europe then? Revolutions broke out in Italy and the German states. Germany is not a country yet. We just call them the German states. There's a whole bunch of them and they're all together, but they're not really united. And Italy actually is not united either. Both Italy and German states are not united. They're just a bunch of little states trying to come together and having a hard time doing that. So Prince von Metternich of Austria, remember the Vienna Congress, he's trying to figure out what to do with Europe and what to do with France, and they got together and determined to maintain order in Europe so he would make sure that these uprisings did not succeed. So he became the guy of Austria to try to be that, maintaining order, being that guy that would make sure that the uprisings wouldn't happen, but of course the uprisings did. In 1830, Poland was tired of being ruled by Russia. So some Poles revolted, but the Tsar Nicholas I of Russia crushed the rebellion. So we have another one here, Poland. So now Poland thinks, well, we don't want to be ruled by Russia anymore. And so the Tsar, we have another rebellion, the Polish trying to rebel against rule of the Tsar in Russia. The revolutions of 1848. So something happens in 1848 that produces a lot more, many more, I should say, revolutions. So it's a revolutionary spirit. Well, what is this revolutionary spirit? And it produces a repeat performance even in France. How can this affect? It's a spirit that every country wants to have a revolution. So in 1848, this is an important date. In 1848, a man named Karl Marx and Engels published their Communist Manifesto, mainly Karl Marx. The theory of communism may be summed up in the single sentence, abolition of private property. He wanted to get rid of private property, and it goes beyond that, but that's one of his sayings. You see, whenever you see this in here, that means he belongs to a secret society, probably of Freemasons or Illuminati or something that's pretty dark, usually. Now, I'm not saying always, but at that time, that was what was going on. You see Napoleon doing the same thing, so, you know, what in the world? But I just look at it and say, something's weird with him. Whenever I see a person with this here, they have this hidden hand. Is that hidden hand good or is that hidden hand bad? You know, so, and Karl Marx was not up to good. He was basically taking the theory of evolution and social evolution into communism. And now even today, some people think, you know, his humanistic ways are good. I don't think so. He was very, very influenced by the dark Illuminati, okay? So more than 50 revolutions broke out across the continent, more than 50. And then France was again ripe for change. Of course, in France, it was not stable anyway, so now we have the revolution wanting to happen again. Like the revolution, the French Revolution in 1988 was 1789 was very, very violent. Let's just say that. So in Paris in February, the insurrection turned into a major revolution. So in Paris, now we're having another revolution. Louis Philippe, remember him? He was the last king there. He fled to England too, just like the rest of them did. You know, the rest of those French kings did. So he fled to England. Remember, England was having peace. And England had a huge military, navy especially, to protect them. So a new government known as the Second Republic was proclaimed. The Second Republic. Remember, the First Republic was back with Napoleon. Now we have the Second Republic. What was the Second Republic about? Well, they revolted to become a Second Republic, thinking they'd be similar to Napoleon's First Republic. So first of all, they said everyone can vote. Every man can vote. Well, that's a pretty good thing. But they wanted every man to vote, and they wanted to try to get more votes and get votes so that they could control the people is what they were doing. So the new struggling government could not overcome the political unrest. So this Second Republic was very weak. Here we have a picture of, we'll find this out, Louis Napoleon. This is Napoleon's brother. They tried to say, okay, let's have another Second Republic. We'll put another Napoleon, you know, in lead. And so they picked Louis Napoleon. Let's look at the next slide, which tell us more about that. So June Day's insurrection. So we think of insurrection, what do we think about? Revolution and violence, don't we? So in 1848, the common workers revolted. Okay, let me tell you one thing about Karl Marx. He invoked any common workers to revolt. He basically said laborers, you know, he would bring in labor unions that were very violent and wanted to take over the wealthier people and make everything common. So he promoted all of this, and so now we have the common workers revolting in France in 1848. Remember that date? That's the Communist Manifesto. Confidence was shaken in the new republic. Now we have the Second Republic, and it's a weak republic. The people of France wanted a republic, but also a strong leader. So this is when they choose who? For goodness sakes, they choose Louis Napoleon, the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte. I said brother, but nephew. He's the nephew So they choose Louis Napoleon. That was that picture on that coin that you just saw. Some French longed for the days of Napoleon because they thought in the days of Napoleon, we had a strong leader and we had peace because he was protecting us, right? And we had prosperity because of him. Even though Napoleon had a lot of issues, let's just say that. In fact, he wanted to be the dictator of the world. So now we have Louis Napoleon, and he was elected president of the Second Republic by an overwhelming majority vote. They said, let's bring in his nephew. He was an extremely popular president for the French at that time. So they wanted to go back because they wanted basically in their nation, they wanted that national pride that goes along with being French, or being that national pride in your country. So Emperor Napoleon III, Louis Napoleon, there he is. See how they wore their mustaches back there? He considered himself to be a direct representative of the people. So he said, I'm the representative. He really didn't care about the parliament. He really didn't care about Congress. In 1851, he dissolved the legislature. That's kind of familiar. That's what the king did before, remember? King Louis did before. So he dissolves the legislature and says, I'm just ruling. In 1852, he declared himself to be Emperor Napoleon III, just like the first Napoleon, And in 1863, Napoleon supplied troops to support the Archduke Maximilian of Austria in the takeover of where? Mexico. So the Archduke saying, we want to take over Mexico. Why do you think they want to do that? They knew that the United States at that time was in the Civil War, and they thought, if we take over Mexico, we might be able to take over the world. We might be able to take over the United States, So here comes the Archduke Maximilian of Austria, and Napoleon gives him troops and says, yes, let's go together. We're going to take over Mexico. So, and the United States in this war had to kind of ignore this war going down in Mexico. And then the United States, after the war, forced the French troops out of Mexico, and Maximilian was executed by the Mexican people. So not only were we having a civil war, we were also having a European tyrant trying to take over Mexico. So this huge fiasco caused many people in France to think, what the world are we doing? So this fiasco caused France much money and Napoleon his prestige, because basically now Mexico, they sent him back, and Maximilian being executed was a disgrace to France, The end of his reign came in 1870 when he brought France into the Franco-Prussian War with Otto von Bismarck. Okay, this is an ugly, ugly thing, the Franco-Prussian War. When I look at that, because basically Otto von Bismarck wanted to go to war with France so that he could unite the states of Germany. So in fact, Otto von Bismarck, he is known to be very close to this Luciferian, occultist, so wanting to have war. Basically, isn't that what the enemy wants? He wants wants to kill and destroy, right? So Otto von Bismarck goes against, and of course, he actually eggs on by actually doing some deceptive things and bringing France into this Franco-Prussian War. Another ugly thing. I hate to tell you, but a lot of these revolutions are ugly. It's an ugly time in history in this part of Europe. So when news reached Paris that Napoleon III had been forced to surrender to the Prussians, remember, the Prussians are not Russians, they're Germans at that time. So they had been forced to surrender to the Prussians. Revolutionists overthrew the emperor and proclaimed a new French Republic again. So we had the First Republic, we have the Second Republic, and now we're going to have a Third Republic, right? That's how unstable France was. And so let's go from there. Austria. Well, of all the states, you would think Austria would be the safest because they had Metternich. And he was a diplomat. And he said he's trying to keep down the revolutions and keep everything, stable, to watch over. And this system would be a good system after the first Napoleon. But Austria too. Austria did not have a stable country either. And even Prince Metternich was forced to flee to where? England. Why are they fleeing to England? Because England had peace. Queen Victoria, she held the Bible up and she gave peace to this little country, gave peace. And that's where they fled, is to England. The German states. Let's stop there and we'll go on with the German states, because this is going to get into Germany, which is going to be a little longer of a time in the video. So let's stop there. We have all these revolutions, and I know you're not going to remember them all. And when you have the test, you may look them up and find it. But the thing is, just to know, this time was set in such turmoil because they had gone away from righteousness, and righteousness exalts a nation.